When I was 18, fresh into the Navy, I thought I knew what life was about, but nothing could have prepared me for meeting him, Michael. He was 32, confident, and unlike anyone I'd ever known. It was in the middle of the vast ocean, surrounded by endless waves, that he showed me a love so profound it would change me forever. This is the story of how one man had the courage to step closer, to show me who he truly was, and to make me question everything I thought I understood about myself. He had the bravery to do this. With me. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. How far would you go for love, even when it seems impossible? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to join me on more heartfelt and emotional journeys like this one. At 18, stepping aboard the USS Valor was both terrifying and exhilarating. The endless expanse of the ocean stretched out before me, its immensity a stark reminder of how small I was in the world. This wasn't just my first assignment in the Navy, it was my first step toward independence. But what I didn't know was that this ship, this mission, would set my life on a course I never could have predicted. Michael stood out from the moment I saw him. He wasn't just another officer. He carried himself with an air of authority that made people listen. But there was something softer beneath the surface. At 32, he seemed untouchable, someone who had seen it all, who was utterly in control. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to dissect everything they landed on. I watched him from a distance, too intimidated to approach. He was the type of man who could command an entire room without saying a word. It wasn't until our second week at sea that we exchanged more than passing pleasantries. The crew was tasked with repairing a malfunction in the navigation system, and as a low-ranking seaman, I was assigned to assist the senior officers. That's when I found myself standing in the small, cramped control room with Michael. "Hand me that wrench," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. I obeyed, fumbling slightly as I passed it to him. He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Nervous?" "A little," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. "First deployment and all." He nodded, tightening a bolt on the panel. "I get it. My first year wasn't much different. You'll find your rhythm." There was nothing extraordinary about that exchange, but something about the way he spoke to me stuck. He didn't dismiss me like some of the others. He took the time to acknowledge me, and for a young recruit trying to prove himself, that meant everything. Over the next few weeks, Michael seemed to go out of his way to check in on me. At first, I thought it was just part of his duty as an officer, but there was something in the way his gaze lingered a little longer, in the way he found reasons to keep me close during routine tasks. I started to notice him more, not just as an officer, but as a man. The way his laugh echoed in the mess hall, the way his hands moved when he spoke, it all fascinated me. One evening, I was on deck watching the sun sink below the horizon when he joined me. He leaned against the railing, his arms crossed, his expression contemplative. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The air between us felt charged, like something unspoken hung in the space. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like the ocean just swallows you up? Like you're nothing compared to it?" He glanced at me, his dark eyes studying mine. "All the time," he admitted. "But sometimes that's what I like about it." Out here, nothing else, I don't know why, but his words struck a chord in me. It felt like he wasn't just talking about the ocean, he was talking about something deeper, something personal. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in my uncertainty. As the weeks went on, our conversations became more frequent, more intimate. We talked about everything. His life before the Navy, my dreams for the future, the little things that made us who we were. Each interaction left me wanting more, but it also left me with questions. Was I imagining the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me a tool? The way his voice softened when he spoke to me? Or was there something real beneath it all? One night, I found myself standing outside his quarters, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't meant to end up there, but something had drawn me to his door. Before I could knock, it opened, and there he was, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite name. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't know what to say, but I knew that whatever was happening between us was about to change everything. Standing at his door, I felt exposed in a way I never had before. Michael's eyes held a mixture of concern and curiosity, and for a fleeting moment, I thought about turning away, pretending this was some mistake. But something in me, perhaps a quiet desperation, kept me rooted to the spot. I started, but the words failed me. My throat was dry, and my heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. He stepped back slightly, holding the door open. "Come in," he said, his voice calm but unreadable. I hesitated for just a second before stepping inside. His quarters were neat, everything in its place, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. He gestured for me to sit on the small bench by the wall while he leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. "What's on your mind, Adam?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. I looked down at my hands, struggling to find the courage to say what I felt. I don't know how to explain it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Try," he encouraged. There was no judgment in his tone, just patience. Taking a deep breath, I lifted my eyes to meet his. "I feel different when I'm around you. Like I can't think straight, but at the same time everything feels clearer. I don't know if it's wrong or if it's just me, but I had to tell you. I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't there." For a moment he didn't respond. The silence was unbearable, and I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. But then he spoke, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You're not wrong, Adam," he said, his gaze steady. "You're brave for saying that. Braver than I was at your age." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. You feel it too?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, a small bittersweet smile playing on his lips. "I do. But this isn't easy. We're on a ship, surrounded by rules and people who wouldn't understand. It's dangerous." I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that I wasn't alone in my feelings, and frustration at the reality of our situation. "I don't care about the rules," I said impulsively. "I care about you." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you do, and I care about you too. But this isn't just about us. If anyone finds out—" "They won't," I interrupted. "We'll be careful." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the risks against what he felt. Finally, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like the first step towards something neither of us fully understood yet. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out. Together." The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen glances and quiet conversations. We found ways to be near each other without drawing suspicion, working on repairs, sharing night shifts on deck, and finding small moments where the rest of the world seemed to fade away. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. But as our connection deepened, so did my questions. Did he see this as something temporary, something fleeting, or was it more? I was too afraid to ask, worried the answer might shatter the fragile world we'd built. One evening, as we stood on the deck under a canopy of stars, I finally found the courage to speak. "Michael," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What is this to you?" He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "This," he repeated. "This is complicated." "I know that," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "But I need to know if it's real for you, because it's real for me." His gaze softened, and he took a step closer. "It's real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More real than anything I've felt in a long time, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous." I wanted to argue, to tell him that love was worth any risk, but before I could speak, the ship's alarm blared, shattering the moment and pulling us back into the harsh reality of life at sea. The alarm's piercing wail sent every sailor on board into motion. Michael and I exchanged a brief, loaded glance before joining the chaos, slipping seamlessly into our roles. The moment we had shared evaporated like mist, replaced by the rigid discipline demanded of us. The alarm had been triggered by a mechanical failure in the engine room, a minor issue but enough to disrupt the ship's routine. I was sent to assist the engineering team, while Michael was called to the bridge. As I worked alongside the others, my mind raced. Every stolen glance, every whispered word we'd shared felt like a secret too heavy to carry. By the time the issue was resolved and the ship returned to its normal rhythm, the weight of our unspoken connection seemed even more unbearable. The fear of being discovered loomed over me like a storm cloud. Every interaction with Michael was a careful dance, close enough to feel the pull of him, but distant enough to avoid suspicion. That night, I lay in my bunk staring at the metal ceiling, my thoughts tangled. I wanted to believe that what we had was worth the risk, but doubt gnawed at me. Did Michael feel the same urgency I did? Or was he content to let this remain a quiet, fleeting thing, hidden in the shadows? The following evening, I found myself on the deck again, drawn to the solace of the ocean. The ship sliced through the waves with a steady rhythm, and the stars above seemed impossibly bright. I didn't hear Michael approach until he was standing beside me, his presence a steadying force. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low and measured. I shrugged, keeping my gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just thinking." "About?" I hesitated, debating whether to speak my truth. But then I remembered his words from before. "You're brave for saying how you feel." Taking a deep breath, I turned to face him. "About us," I admitted. "About whether this is real or just something you'll forget when we're back on land." His expression softened, and for a moment, the mask he wore as an officer slipped away. "Adam," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "This isn't something I could forget, even if I wanted to. But that doesn't mean it's easy." I stepped closer, the space between us charged with unspoken tension. "I don't want easy," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I want you." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But then his hand reached for mine, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through me. "I want you too," he said, the words barely audible. "But we have to be careful. The Navy doesn't forgive things like this." I knew he was right, but the thought of hiding what we had felt like a betrayal of the very thing that made it so special. Still, I nodded, understanding the reality of our situation. For now, secrecy was the price we had to pay for what little we could have. Over the next few weeks, our connection grew stronger, even as the risk of discovery loomed ever larger. We found ways to steal moments together. A late-night conversation in the supply room, a brief touch as we passed each other in the hallway. Each interaction was a lifeline, a reminder that what we shared was worth the danger. But the strain of secrecy took its toll. One evening, as we worked side by side on a routine maintenance task, Michael suddenly spoke, his voice tight with frustration. "This isn't sustainable, Adam. Living like this, it's exhausting." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "So what do we do? Pretend it doesn't exist?" His jaw clenched, and he turned to face me. "No, I don't want to pretend. But I also don't know how to make this work." The vulnerability in his voice hit me like a wave. For all his strength and confidence, Michael was just as uncertain as I was. Taking a step closer, I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "We figure it out," I said firmly. "Together." He held my gaze for a long moment before nodding. "Together," he echoed, a hint of a smile breaking through. But, just as the tension between us seemed to ease, a voice called from down the corridor, sharp and commanding. "Lieutenant Michaels, Seaman Carter. What's going on here?" We froze, the blood draining from my face. The voice belonged to Commander Green, a man known for his strict adherence to protocol. As he approached, his eyes flicked between us, suspicion etched into his features. "What are you two doing?" he demanded. Michael's hand slipped from mine, his posture snapping into formal rigidity. "Nothing, sir," he said evenly. "Just finishing up here." Green's gaze lingered on me, his expression unreadable. "Get back to your quarters," he said finally, his tone cold. "Both of you." As I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that our fragile secret had just been placed in jeopardy. The tension in the air after Commander Green's confrontation was suffocating. I spent the night replaying the moment in my head, dissecting every word and expression, searching for any indication that he knew more than he let on. Sleep was impossible. The fear of discovery wrapped itself around me like chains, each link tightening with every passing hour. The next morning, I avoided Michael as best I could. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew I had to. If Green suspected anything, the last thing we needed was to draw more attention to ourselves. Yet, as the hours dragged on, the weight of not seeing him became unbearable. By the time evening rolled around, I found myself back on the deck, staring out at the churning waves. The sky was overcast, and the wind carried a sharpness that hinted at an approaching storm. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Michael until he was standing beside me. "Adam," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. I turned to face him, my chest tightening at the sight of him. He looked exhausted, the usual confidence in his posture replaced by something heavier, guilt, perhaps, or worry. "Michael, what if Green knows?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What if this is it?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around to ensure we were alone. "We don't know anything for sure," he said firmly. "But we need to be careful. No more stolen glances, no more late-night talks. Not for a while." His words stung, even though I knew he was right. "So, what? We just pretend this doesn't exist?" His gaze softened and he stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine for the briefest moment. "No, we just make sure it exists where no one else can see." The storm hit later that night, a fierce squall that tossed the ship like a toy in the hands of a restless child. Rain lashed against the windows, and the deck became a chaotic mess of sailors fighting to secure equipment. I was assigned to assist with the lifeboats, working alongside a group of men whose shouts were barely audible over the howling wind. Amid the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Michael on the upper deck, barking orders with his usual authority. For a moment, our eyes met across the storm, and I saw something in his expression that sent a chill down my spine. Not fear, but resolve. The storm grew worse, and the ship shuddered under the force of the waves. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air, followed by shouts from above. A piece of the mast had snapped, crashing onto the deck just feet away from where Michael stood. Without thinking, I scrambled toward him, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "Michael!" I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the wind. He turned to see me just as another wave slammed into the ship, sending both of us sprawling onto the slippery deck. We scrambled to our feet, clutching onto whatever we could to steady ourselves. "You shouldn't be here!" he yelled, his voice strained. "I'm not leaving you!" I shot back, grabbing his arm as another wave crashed over the side. For a brief moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world fighting against the elements together. By the time the storm began to subside, the deck was a mess of broken equipment and exhausted sailors. Michael and I were soaked to the bone, our hands scraped and bruised from hours of work. As we stood together in the aftermath, the weight of everything, our connection, the risk, the danger, settled over us like a fog. "Adam," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from shouting. "We can't keep doing this. Not like this." My heart sank. "What are you saying?" He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a pain I hadn't seen before. "I'm saying I don't want to lose you. But if we're not careful, this will destroy us both." Before I could respond, footsteps approached, and we quickly stepped apart. Commander Green appeared, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the damage on the deck. His gaze lingered on Michael, then shifted to me. "Good work tonight," he said curtly, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Get some rest." As he walked away, the knot in my stomach tightened. There was no way to know what Green was thinking or how much he had seen. But one thing was clear. The storm wasn't over, and this was only the beginning. The days after the storm were tense, every glance from Commander Green feeling heavier than it should. Michael kept his distance, but I could feel the weight of his gaze whenever we were in the same room. It was as if he was trying to protect me by pushing me away, and it tore at my heart. Late one night, I found a note slipped under my door. "Meet me at the stern after lights out." I knew it was from Michael. Despite the risks, I went. He was waiting, leaning against the railing with the ocean stretching endlessly behind him. His face was shadowed, but the vulnerability in his posture was clear. "I can't stay away, Adam," he said quietly. "I've tried, but it's impossible." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Then don't," I said simply. "We'll figure it out." He hesitated, then pulled me into a brief, desperate embrace. For a moment, the world faded, leaving just the two of us. But reality was always there, looming like the waves crashing against the ship. "We have to be careful," he whispered. "But I'm not giving this up." Our stolen moments were fleeting but precious, each one a reminder of what we risked. But fate had other plans. During a rescue mission weeks later, Michael was among the crew sent to help a stranded vessel. A sudden explosion shattered the calm seas, and he was lost. The news hit me like a tidal wave. In the days that followed, the world felt empty without him. I clung to the memory of his smile, his voice, the way he had made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. As I stood on the deck during the memorial, the horizon seemed endless, just like my grief. But as tears blurred my vision, I felt a strange sense of peace. He had loved me, and that love was something no one could take away. This story is more than just a memory. It's a reminder that love, no matter how fleeting, can leave a mark that lasts forever. Have you ever experienced a love that changed you, even if it couldn't last? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more stories that touch the heart.